of boll weevils eating their crops, unpredictable weather, and uncertain prices, they found sanctuary there in that small church. It was difficult sitting through a long-winded sermon, given that we did not have cushioned pews, of course. And we had to swat away flies and wasps. But I didn't care. For that church was an integral part of who I was. I was the first child baptized in that church. And whenever Dad and us were stationed elsewhere, I always looked forward to coming home and spending my summers with my grandparents there and going to church. I thought that church would outlive me. It would be around for ages to come. But unfortunately, she was abandoned in the early 1970s. She was like a monument to me. You know, we Americans love our monuments, do we not? The Statue of Liberty, the Golden Gate Bridge, the Gateway Arch in St. Louis. Our monuments are our link to the past. They speak to our unique culture, our history, and our heritage. But we must always keep this thought in mind. That which is built by the hands of humans are fragile. There are no guarantees. Watch any movie from the 1980s or 1990s that was filmed in New York City. You'll always see in the background those two imposing structures of the World Trade Center. They came to symbolize the economic vitality of America. They were the pride and joy of not only New Yorkers, but also Americans. And we know the painful lesson of 9/11 when we saw those buildings tumbling down following the terrorist attacks. Jesus and his disciples were walking through the Kidron Valley right outside of Jerusalem. And his disciples remark about how beautiful the temple is. Now keep in mind, the temple was always at the epicenter of Israel's religious life. You recall that King David wanted the honor of building a permanent home for the God of Israel, Yahweh. But he was denied that honor. Instead, it fell to his son Solomon. As we read in the scriptures, we learn that Solomon did not, deny himself any opportunity, nor did he spare any expense to build the most resplendent of temples. He taxed the people heavily to do so. It became the pride and the joy of the Jewish people. There they made their sacrifices, they offered their tithes. There they gathered each Passover and they worshiped God. But the temple was destroyed by the invading armies of King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. And when the exiles returned to their native land, their first order of business was to rebuild the walls of the city and to repair the temple to the best of their ability, in hopes of resurrecting Israel's religious life after so much tragedy and despair. Then King Herod, a man loathed by the Jewish people, a most despicable character, notorious, ruthless, a usurper to all of those ideals and beliefs that the Jewish people cherished. Nevertheless, this man who eliminated many members of his family, including one of his wives, because he was paranoid that he might lose grip on the power he possessed, nevertheless left a legacy for history. He was a great architect and builder. He is responsible for the construction of Masada, Herodium, where he is buried, the port of Caesarea, the aqueducts. But his greatest achievement was the building of the temple in Jerusalem. Again, no expense was spared. A mountainside was leveled for the site of the temple. It is said that the courtyard of the temple was so massive that 250,000 people could gather at one time there. It again became the symbol of who Israel was. This was God's home. No longer for them was God a nomadic deity. Now God had this most resplendent, beautiful edifice in which to live. And I'm sure Jesus' disciples could not fathom the idea that it would ever disappear from the face of the earth. Oh, look how beautiful it is. Its massive stones. How it is adorned, inlaid with gold and silver. It would make any Jew proud of their nation and their religion. But Jesus says, the time is coming when all these things will be so completely demolished that not one stone will be left on top of another. They had to be startled by his prediction. They could not envision something so beautiful, so massive, so important to the nation ever being destroyed, no longer existing. But the point Jesus is making is that the bedrock of one's faith lies not in buildings built by the hands of humans, but in Him as the Son of God, the Redeemer of humanity. Of course, they want to know, when is this going to happen? At what time will this occur? Inquiring minds wanted to know. It's hard making predictions, is it not? Trying to predict the outcome of a football game or an election. Sometimes when we make predictions, we embarrass ourselves. In 1962, an executive with Decca Records was provided with a demonstration tape from a British rock group. He said the sound is terrible and their guitar style is going out of fashion. And so those 4 mop-head youngsters from Liverpool had to go and find another record label. And the rest is history. In 1899, the United States Patent Office pondered whether it should close down or not because they believed there was nothing else left to be invented. They believed that the Titanic was unsinkable. And look what happened. There was a gentleman in radio who once said that the television is a fascinating gadget, but it will never be a commercial success. He said this in the early 1940s. We have to be careful when we make predictions. Jesus gives his disciples a hint what will preclude the end of time. As far as his prediction of the temple being raised, that did occur in 70 AD. When the Romans, ever so fatigued by these Jewish uprisings, decided to teach this vassal state a lesson. They demolished her temple, her monument to God. And you'll find this true throughout history. When you want to suppress a people, the first thing you do, you try to take their means of worship away from them. But Jesus says it's not important as to the exact time or the exact date. What is important is that you be prepared. You be prepared for the inevitable. Now, we have made the prediction of the end of time into a cottage industry. Hal Lindsey, in his book, The Late Great Planet Earth, he had it all figured out that on a certain date, the world was going to cease to exist. Perhaps you saw the movie 2012 based on the Mayan calendar that everything was to vanish in 2012. Well, in hindsight, we can say that those predictions were wrong. It's not necessary to predict, but more so to prepare. And Jesus asked his disciples to prepare. He says, because you will be hated, you will be loathed, you will be mocked, you will be spat upon. You will be betrayed, even by your own families. He is not promising them a rose garden, but only the hardship that comes with one who chooses to walk in the footsteps of the Master. A promise that remains to us even to this day. The hardships incumbent upon anyone who chooses to walk in the footsteps of the Master, be a true disciple of Jesus Christ. We will turn some off. We will be mocked. There will be those who will laugh at us. And many, unfortunately, will become discouraged. But Jesus says to his disciples, even when all this happens, I will give you words and wisdom that none of your adversaries will be able to resist or contradict you. You see, Jesus is our bedrock of faith. Not that created by the hands of humans. These things that will disappear in time. We cannot go wrong as long as we are deeply committed to the teachings and the work of the Master. That is our monument, our enduring monument there. His life, his words, his sacrifice, and his resurrection from the dead. He is the imperishable monument of history. There was a skit one time put on by Mel Brooks and Carl Reiner called The 2013-Year-Old Man. And they played off against one another, and Mel Brooks was a Jewish subject in this little skit. And he was asked, do y'all worship God? He says, no, we don't worship God. They said, well, who do you worship? Well, we worship a man named Phil. Well, why do you worship Phil? Well, Phil is big, he's strong, he's mean, and he could break you in two with his bare hands. Said, do y'all ever pray? Said, yeah, we used to pray. Phil, please don't get angry with us and break us in two. Said, well, why did y'all quit, worshiping Phil? Said, one day there was a thunderstorm, he was struck by lightning and killed, then we realized that there was a greater power than Phil. So true. And then Jesus said, there will be those who purport to be, the Messiah. But I am the only true Messiah. We're always looking for a Messiah, especially in difficult times, in desperate situations. We're always hoping that one will appear who will be the Savior of humanity, will make everything right, who will bring every one of us lasting prosperity. Hitler was viewed by his people as being a Messiah. Joseph Stalin was seen by the Russians as a Messiah, as was Mussolini, and every despot through history can attribute their rise to power based on the frustrations of the people who are angry, disillusioned, hoping that a Messiah will step forth. But Jesus tells his disciples, many will claim to be the Messiah. Do not listen to them. For there's only one true Messiah, and that is the Son of God, incarnate, one who died on Calvary's cross for the redemption of the sins of all humanity, the one who overcame whatever claim that death might have upon him when he walked out of the tomb. He says, as long as you believe in that, you will prevail over your adversaries. And even though they hate you, they mock you, they decry you because of me, but not a hair on your head will perish. And his final words to them, as he calls upon them to make him the bedrock of their faith, which can never be torn down by any enemy. Stand firm, and you will win life. Our message for the day, stand firm in Jesus Christ, and each of us will have life. Because all else is perishable. Everything else is fragile. That which we believe is enduring may not be so. Go to Jerusalem today. There's but one wall of that temple of Herod remaining, known as the Western Wall, the Wailing Wall. Tell you how precious that wall is even today to the people, because after the destruction of the temple in 70 AD and the people were dispersed, they still looked to God for help. And their cry was, next year in Jerusalem, always believing that God would lead them back to the site of the temple. Following Israel's War of Independence in the late 1940s, the Jews were banned from entering the old city. In 1967, during the 7-day or 6-day war, one of the emotional moments of that conflict was when General Mordechai and his Israeli paratroops went through the Lions Gate there in Jerusalem. I'm sure Barbara, y'all went through that same gate. And they fought street to street, these young Jewish soldiers, when suddenly it was heard over the radio, the Temple Mount is ours, the Temple Mount is ours. And you see these photographs of these older soldiers and even the younger soldiers moved by that moment, standing there at the Western Wall, praying. Just praying. They had come home. The promise had been fulfilled. Next year in Jerusalem. That wall is but a remnant of what was once great. It's massive. You can look up 200 feet and you have this wall before you. But it is only a shadow of the greatness of the temple which once stood there. But the temple we worship will never be torn down. That temple is Jesus Christ. Let us pray. Give us endurance, Father. Give us strength. Give us courage. For you have called us to be your disciples, not solely to worship you, to acknowledge you, to note on some application or form that we are a Christian, but to live out that Christian creed of offering ourselves in total obedience to you in service to the world. 2,000 years since that great event of your walking upon this earth in the flesh. Your name is still upon the lips of millions and millions throughout the world. For Jesus changed the very course of history